Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for being so disciplined to come promptly after lunch. I wonder why that might be the case. One little housekeeping note. At the end of this session, we move into the session on NATO, and it's kind of a seamless web, so if you could remain in your seats at the end of this 30-minute discussion, that would be wonderful. To my right is Senator John McCain, someone you've met many times before at this conference, the chairman of the Armed Services Committee. To his right, Senator John Barroso, the chairman of the Senate Republican Policy Committee and the fourth ranking member of the Senate Republican leadership. We have a lot of things to discuss during this. One of them is going to be, one of the things that foreigners just don't get about the United States, the Constitution, the relationship between Congress and the presidency. And I was struck by my lack of understanding as a non-American about American affairs and things American when my friend and colleague, the president of the forum, introduced us all yesterday, pointing about something that happened, a great event in the US heartland, something to do with the Chicago Cubs. And I thought it was great of Peter to come here and to congratulate the winner of the Stanley Cup. Peter's a great Nationals fan, and I know that he and his son Yasha, who's here today, are going to be very happy when they win the Super Bowl this Christmas. So, we've obviously got a lot of things we need to understand. But first of all, Senators, that election. Have either of you ever been so worried or apprehensive about an incoming presidency as you are right now?
I'm not worried. This was a very consequential election for a number of reasons, because it wasn't just about the presidency. It was about much more. The Senate was in flux. There was a question of which party would control the presidency, as well as the Senate. And the third is the Supreme Court, because with the death of Justice Scalia and that open seat, we had made very clear that the American people would decide what direction they wanted the court to take for the next 30 or 40 years, because the incoming president would be able to make that choice. And the American people were very clear. I think many people were surprised at the outcome of the election, but I think the voters really understood what was at stake. It wasn't just 4 years for a presidency first term, but it was truly about the next 25 years from the direction that the American government takes.
I certainly want to come back to that point, but the same question to Senator McCain.
Let me just finally add, campaigns do matter. And the campaign, and I've always had a very good and warm relationship with Hillary Clinton over many years, but she didn't run a good campaign. And that matters. It matters in Canada, it matters in the United States, it matters in any democracy. And the other point is, I think that what even some of us who were running and reelected did not appreciate sufficiently is the frustration that a lot of Americans felt that over the last 8 years, their lives have not improved measurably. And in some areas of states like Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, where they had large numbers of people who have been displaced from their jobs, whether it be from trade, as everybody alleged, or whether it be from technology, which I think was a lot of the reason. If you go to an automobile factory today in Michigan, where you used to see people crawling all over an automobile as it went down the assembly line, you'll see several people watching the robots put that automobile together, and there's people that used to work there that will never see another job. And so I think all of us failed to appreciate the frustration that so many millions of Americans felt, because their lives really have not improved much since the collapse of 2008. I think that was something that the pollsters failed to detect. And by the way, there was also some people that refused to tell a pollster that they were voting for Trump. I mean, they didn't.
Again, to both of you gentlemen, is the Trump phenomenon, and I'm talking about the Republican Party here, and we'll come to the Democrats in a second, is this a one-time event, or is the Republican Party, as we have known it, over?
I think people are going to be, we were best when we're united talking about things we agree on, as any party is. And there is a strength in the unity of talking about jobs, the economy, and national security. And on those things, we agree. And national security is energy security, as Senator Sullivan talked about today. It's economic security. Border security is a part of that. It's a security of people for their jobs, for their communities, for safety in a time with the international crisis that we're facing. And we as a party are united on all of those things. Obviously, if you want to focus on things that divide any party, that takes away the strength of that party. But I think that Donald Trump was the strongest and our party was the strongest. And I would point out that Senator McCain beat Donald Trump in Arizona by 10%. So
maybe I'm digging for the pony, but I believe. But I believe.
That's another phrase that non-Americans don't.
I believe that there's every opportunity for us to work together. The approval rating of Congress is 14%. Is there anyone here in the 14% that approves of Congress? Please raise your hand. If you just raise your hand, please do not drive an automobile here in Halifax. You're a danger to yourself and others. Politicians, by nature of our business, seek the approval of the people we represent. That's why we run for office. That's why we serve. You know, I've got this line. I landed at Phoenix Sky Harbor Airport, and a guy ran up to me and said, "Hey," he said, "anybody ever tell you look a lot like Senator John McCain?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Doesn't it sometimes make you mad as hell?" So I do see an opportunity for us Republicans and Democrats. Look, the Democrats see that they've got real challenge because the next cycle, the advantage is with us. This time, the advantage was with the Democrats, and they didn't succeed. And I've known Chuck Schumer. We've known Chuck Schumer well. He likes to make deals. He's a very involved individual that I've worked with, for example, on immigration reform and other issues. So I think there's a possibility that we could sit down together, do tax reform, bring the $2 trillion that's now parked overseas home and invested in infrastructure and bridges and highways, et cetera. Try to come together on a common challenge to some of the international issues that national security challenges we face. But we are going to fix Obamacare one way or the other. And they can join us or they don't have to join us, because all we need is 51 votes using a process that I won't bore you with the details. It would be far better for all of us if we gave the president a honeymoon and worked together and presented him with things like tax reform, repatriation of a good, solid defense bill that we could all support. There's a number of areas that are open to cooperation between Republicans and Democrats, and that's what I think all of us are committed to.
I'm very interested by something you said about the nature of what's going on outside the presidency in the Congress. Is there the gridlock and the inability and the division within Congress over many years now? Is it in a kind of, not necessarily looking for a silver lining from the cloud, but is there a sense, do you gentlemen get a sense in Congress that Democrats and Republicans, perhaps for the first time in many years, may be prepared to actually come together again in a way that they used to, but sort of lost the habit of doing?
Well, there are a number of things. I mean, we're here as a bipartisan group, and take a look at some of the things that we passed in a bipartisan way. We did a transportation bill. It's 6 years in length. What was the vote, Chris? Like 83-13. We did a revision of No Child Left Behind, getting rid of the National School Board, getting education at a local level. That was maybe 85-12. We've had a number of pieces of legislation, a major public works program with waterways, big numbers. It doesn't get much attention in the press. What usually gets attention is the fight, as opposed to the areas where people are actually cooperating and getting things done. But in terms of your point too, the things that stand the test of time, whether it's a civil rights law, whether it's Medicare, those are things that had big bipartisan buy-in. And whenever one party runs too far to the right or to the left and leaves the other party behind, as it did with the health care law, I think it doesn't help society, it doesn't help that party in the long run, and you don't get a solution that is lasting.
It's what John's point I'd just like to emphasize. When you are doing major pieces of legislation, you've got to have buy-in from both parties. Obamacare was the first social engineering or reform that was ever passed on a strict party line basis. They never allowed us an amendment. Never allowed us into it in any way. So of course we weren't on board. Every other major one, whether it be social, going all the way back to Social Security, Medicaid, you name it, they've all been bipartisan. And that certainly, I hope, is a lesson to both parties.
And to come back to this point about the powers of the, basically come back to the American Constitution, the powers of Congress versus the presidency versus the Supreme Court. If, hypothetically, things go haywire, what powers does Congress have? Let's use waterboarding as an example because it's so much in the public eye. What powers does Congress have to actually rein in a president who does things which you find intolerable?
Well, first of all, I was observed the panel on the issue of waterboarding. My friends, last year on the Defense Authorization Bill, we had an amendment that said that any agency of government, an interrogation has to be guided by the Army Field Manual. The Army Field Manual specifically states only certain things, techniques for interrogation that can be used. Waterboarding is not one of them. Extremes in temperature is not one of them. There are several others. And so you've got the Geneva Conventions, which we're signatories to, which prohibit waterboarding, and we now have a law. Now, prior to that law, we just didn't do it until this administration. The CIA decided to do it. They cannot do that. If they started waterboarding, I swear to you, there's a whole bunch of us that would have them in court in a New York minute. And there's no judge in America that wouldn't say they're in violation of the law because it's specifically in law now prohibited. So I don't give a damn what the President of the United States wants to do or anybody else wants to do. We will not waterboard. We will not torture. We will not torture people, and sometime I hope we can get David Petraeus up to this forum. He's one of the great military leaders. He'll tell you, it doesn't work. My friends, it doesn't work. If you inflict enough pain on somebody long enough, they're going to tell you whatever they think you want to hear to have it stopped. There's a specific case, Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who gave under waterboarding, gave false information to those who was interrogating them and sent them on wild goose chases. Whereas there are accomplished interrogators who can gain the confidence of the suspect and gain all the information that they could possibly want. But my God, what does it say about America if we're going to inflict torture on people? It makes it hard for us to make the argument about the moral superiority of our government and our way of life.
Let me just respond to your question about the three branches of government and what checks and balances are, because that's the way it was set up, I think, brilliantly so many centuries ago. I mean, the idea is that there is a check and a balance, and it's not unusual over the decades for one of those branches, due to either personality or abilities, to take a little increase in their powers, and I think that Barack Obama has done quite a bit of that. And even as he's leaving office, his chief of staff at the White House has said on the way out the door they would be using audacious executive actions. So now that Donald Trump is coming in, these are things that, if they actually do those things, we have a mechanism in the Congress to pull back those midnight regulations. But that's how administrations do it, with regulations. Congress does it with the power of the purse. The Supreme Court does it with rulings on lawsuits. Is this what the law really means and stands for? It takes time to work its way through the courts. So we've seen that in this administration. But that's how the three branches of government are set up to work, as long as no branch of government hands over its power to the other. And my concern in the last number of years, when Harry Reid was the leader of the Senate, that he didn't really protect the institution of the Congress in an effort to try to help Barack Obama.
So in a
acquire
sense, you're saying that the without exaggerating the point, that the previous, well, the current administration, the Obama administration, softened up the way for Donald Trump potentially to exploit a situation, and yet, as Senator McCain says, the mechanisms are in fact still there to rebuff something which is totally unconstitutional against the law.
When President Obama said, "I've got a pen and I've got a phone," when he was talking about relations with Congress, that was very disturbing. One of the most disturbing comments I've ever seen any president of the United States make. In other words, he's going to disregard Congress. Second point is, we do have the power of the purse, funding, and with a majority in both houses, we could say no fund shall be used to fill in the blank. And third of all, every major position in government has to be confirmed by or not confirmed by the Senate of the United States. That is a very significant power. So I'm hoping that we'll get back a little more stability. But I finally would just add, we can't forget that according to the Constitution, even though we are three co-equal branches of government, there's only one commander-in-chief. And there can only be one commander-in-chief. And we can't forget that. And so that is going to have to be something that may play out in the future in our relationship. And finally, there's a thing called the War Powers Act. And the War Powers Act requires Congress to endorse military action by the President of the United States of America. Congress has not felt that they would like to assume that responsibility. We talk about authorization for the use of force all the time. Congress has not taken up that responsibility.
In terms of actually dealing with the incoming president, the president-elects, just off the cuff, have either of you...
It's going to be huge.
Yeah. Well, he's good at big deals, so, you know. Have either of you actually spoken to Donald Trump since November 8?
I have.
How did it go?
Fine.
Did he offer you a job?
I missed that.
Senator Barrasso?
Yeah, I spoke to him several times before the election. I actually chaired the platform committee at the National Convention. So the Republican platform that has come out that was approved at the convention is one that I chaired that and worked with Donald Trump a couple of times before that. Last was with him November 1st, which was the rollout of the Obamacare opening day for people to sign up on the exchanges. We were in Philadelphia along with Mike Pence to talk about Obamacare, the impact that it's had on the American people, and goals to change that, to give people more freedom and flexibility and choice. I mean, if this was a race between freedom and government, with Hillary Clinton representing the government candidate and Donald Trump the freedom candidate, we know the way it turned out.
Just before I open it up to the audience, on a final point from my side, do you believe, presumably you hope, that a point of equilibrium will be found and that there will be a way to work with this president for the benefit of the United States and the wider world?
We always have, and I believe that we must. Every politician, every 2 or 4 or 6 years, comes to the American people and says, this is the most important election in history, vote for me. I could make an argument. If you look at the world, in our previous panel, we talked a lot about that. If you looked at the state of our economy, if you looked at all of the factors that are now happening both internationally and nationally, I could argue that this was the most important election in history, and I think every one of us that were elected or re-elected appreciate that. The world's on fire. We have the domestic issues that are of enormous proportions. The American people, at least a whole lot of them, just spoke about their frustration about the state of their lives and the economy. And I think that most of us and I know I speak for my Democrat colleagues as well as Republicans, that we have to work together, and we have to work with whoever the American people select. Is it up to us to override the verdict of the American people? I don't think so.
Do you think that the Congress will work in a reasonable way, in a way that does not excite one massive scandalous headline after another, week in, week out? Do you think you will find that point of balance and equilibrium?
Well, I think we do. I'm optimistic about getting it done. I think that with, you know, John, when you look at the fact that in the next election, as you said, it's much more favorable to the Republicans because only 8 or 9 of us are up and 25 Democrats are up in the Senate. You know, and in 10 of those are in states.
Dr. Barrasso is not exactly threatened, I might point out.
And 10 of those Democrats that are up for re-election in the Senate, if they choose to run, are in states that Donald Trump won. So I think they would be tending to want to be more cooperative rather than combative if they want to maintain their election.
Well, with the Republican president.
And that's going to be, let's get together and let's work on some things.
Right. Well, with the Republican presidency, a Republican Senate, and Republican House, in theory, the Republican Party has enormous power right now, if you guys can come together.
It's the first time in I don't know how many years, I think somebody said 1928 or something like that, that there's been the Republican control of all 3 branches.
Thank you. I'm going to throw open to questions to the audience. One thing I would say, and it speaks back to a comment Senator McCain made in the previous panel, there are a lot of very serious things going on in the world. Let's not go into speculation about who's going to be the next Secretary of Transport and that kind of thing. Let's go to hard issues. James Kirchick, up there, please.
Thank you. James Kirchick with the Foreign Policy Initiative. The head of the NSA the other day confirmed what many of us suspected, which is that Russia basically subverted our democracy, that they were hacking and trying to achieve a result, and that they did achieve their results. And I'm curious if both of you will join your fellow Republican Senator Lindsey Graham in calling for congressional hearings into what just happened.
Well, first of all, I didn't hear the quote, but I do not think that the outcome of the election was affected by Russian hacking. Okay? I think that the American people have a good sense to vote on candidates without any help from Russian hackers or anything else. So, but I do believe that it's important for us to have, and I would be recommending, a select committee on the whole issue of cybersecurity. We need to address this issue, and it crosses jurisdictional lines in the Congress between different committees, intelligence, armed services, foreign relations, etc. And we need to have a very hard look at this whole issue of cybersecurity, my friends. It is just too big. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff testified before the Armed Services Committee. A question one of the senators, I think it was Lindsey Graham, asked, said, how do we stack up in relation to challenges by our possible adversaries? He said, in every one, we have a significant advantage, except one, cyber. Except one, cyber. And when Admiral Rogers, the head of Cyber Command, testifies before our committee and says, I don't know what I don't know, that, my friends, is one of the more disturbing comments that you could ever hear. So we're going to have to work on this whole issue of cyber. But as far as the Russian hacking is concerned, look, the Chinese hacked my campaign. That's why I lost. Because now I know why I lost. But so I don't think that honestly, that I don't accept that premise that the Russian hackers could have affected the good judgment of the American people. You, John?
I think Peter had a question.
Yeah. Just to follow on that, Peter McKay, former. Just to follow on the issue of cyber.
I used to know him.
One of the motivators, of course, is the economy. And then there's all kinds of other sort of things that flow from that, critical infrastructure, national security interests. But on the economy, it's been said security trumps trade, and there's all kinds of wordplays here. Will the Senate trump Trump on things like ripping up free trade or moving on some of these important economic issues that have much broader implications for North America, the Western world, and beyond? those economic issues are sometimes overlooked in our discussions here, but they're front and center, and the signal coming from the incoming administration is that they intend to move first on some of these economic issues, including free trade with Canada and Mexico.
We had a meeting this morning with the defense minister of Estonia. They have a flat 20% tax, flat tax. You do your tax return on the internet, you punch it in, and it's over. And look at our tax code. It's that high. No one I've ever met understands our tax code. If one of our efforts was to simplify the tax code, I think it would be supported by literally every single American. And I think that there's enough bipartisan support for that. Now, when you get into the details, it's very, very tough, you know, the special interests, et cetera. But I think that could be sufficient impetus. The other part of your question was
Trade.
Trade. Could I just say very briefly, and I think that, you know, there's this whole line about ignoring the lessons of history. There was a thing called the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Acts that most historians view as a protectionist act that was one of the major causes of the Great Depression. The turn down of the TPP, when Hillary Clinton turned against it after being for it, and Trump campaigned against it, I think that you're going to see Chinese assertion of economic influence in the region and possible dominance. And I think that we are going to pay an incredible price for abandoning TPP. I think that the price will be unbelievably bad. All of these countries are now going to join with China in trade agreements between them, Asian countries, and we're going to be out in the cold. I think this is a terrible thing. And historians will judge us very harshly.
You know, we did pass Trade Promotion Authority. I think Dan Sullivan talked about it a little bit this morning. That's and I voted for it because it was going to give a president the authority, and it's a 6-year authority. So it wasn't just for Barack Obama. It would go to the next president, who will be Donald Trump. And you take a look at his background, his history, the things he's been able to accomplish from a business standpoint. And with trade, you know, I think he's going to use that to try to expand American trade in ways different than the kind of things that have been negotiated in the past.
Can I ask a final question, literally in 30 seconds as a Brit, since we had Brexit this year? Will the United States do a free trade deal with Britain before the European Union?
I hope so. Frankly, you know, all this speculation, and it's natural about who's going to be in the president's cabinet and who's going to do what. I think a lot of it's going to depend on some of the people around the president who will be responsible for trade.
So it's quite realistic.
Yeah, I don't. We have a relationship, frankly, with the British that is unique. We all know we have this special relationship, as Churchill called it. And so it wouldn't surprise me at all if we could get significant support for a trade agreement between the United States and the British. And by the way, could I just mention, I come from a border state. And to cut off NAFTA will have a dramatic and significant economic impact on my state. I could take you to a port of entry in the southern part on the Arizona-Sonoran border where you'll see trucks lined up from as far as you can see one way, trucks lined up as far as you can see the other way. The finance minister of Mexico told me that Mexico does more business with Arizona than it does with Spain. I'm telling you that our trade relationship with both Canada and Mexico is something that we need to preserve it above all else to start with.
You asked specifically Britain versus the European Union. Our colleague from France is here. They have primaries. Tomorrow is round 1, round 2 next week to get to see who's going to run against Le Pen if France even remains in the European Union. So there may not be, when we come together again here next year, a European Union.
Okay, well, for some Britons, that's a very optimistic answer. But ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much, and please join me in thanking the two senators for a wonderful discussion.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, that was excellent.